Volunteer tourism. What is it, and is it for you? A combination of volunteering and tourism is a popular form of international travel that allows you to contribute to sustainable development while exploring a new country and a new culture. Volunteer tourism, also called voluntourism, is a type of tourism. Volunteer tourism can be defined as tourists who, for various reasons, volunteer in an organized way to undertake holidays that might involve aiding or alleviating the material poverty of some groups in society. The restoration of certain environments or research into aspects of social or environment. Volunteer tourism's main goal at the end of the trip is to feel like there was a difference made in the community that the tourist group was in. An examination of the positive and negative impacts of volunteer tourism on the community and the participants will demonstrate that volunteer tourism is a sustainable and viable form of volunteer tourism. Many people find that doing volunteer work while traveling is the best of both worlds. Now let's talk about the market size. How big of the market size is volunteer tourism out of the rest of the tourism industry, and who do they target market? Volunteer tourism has debatably become a mass niche market accelerated by a number of factors. Some of these factors include a wide range of target market, the progression of volunteer projects opportunities, and a numerous destination advertising this form of tourism. All of these factors have increased the competitive nature of this form of tourism. Me2We, a volunteer tourism organization, is already trying to market to everyone by offering youth groups for 13 to 18-year-olds, university trips for 18 to 25-year-olds, adults and family trips, which is the widest range of age span, 8 to 80-year-olds, corporate groups, so your whole work could go on one of these groups, and lastly, school groups. With volunteer tourism, the target market is not really clearly defined, as it can really be targeted to anyone, as there is many different opportunities tourists can take depending on what they want to do, their ability level, how much they want to volunteer, and where they want to volunteer. The concept of volunteer tourism links to other separate but somewhat related categories in tourism. For example, alternate tourism, charity tourism, responsible tourism, sustainable tourism, ecotourism, cultural tourism, agricultural tourism, social tourism, and lastly, moral tourism. Now, depending on what you do on your trip depends on what categories your form of volunteer tourism would fit into. Your trip might fit into all of these categories, some of these categories, or you might even find some categories that aren't listed here but that fall into it. For example, there's an organization out there called WOLF, which is an organization that you get to go and volunteer at organic farms. You just go, and for your volunteering, you get your room and board and food all paid for. Now that category would be agricultural tourism, and not so much charity tourism. But if you went with a church group, then you might fit more into the charity group, and if you don't do anything on a farm, you might not fit into the agricultural tourism sector. Now, why would people choose to volunteer for this type of tourism? As stated earlier, many people find doing volunteer work while also traveling is the best of both worlds. But everyone has different reasons for wanting to go on a volunteer trip. Although everyone has different reasons, there's been studies done that show there have been some common reasons with many of the people who want to go on these trips or have already gone on these trips. Some of those motivations are learning from the local community people. They want to change their life's outlook, make a difference, go for the volunteering experience, as well as family background. The best way to know and understand a culture is to intermingle with the locals of the country. Through volunteer tourism, you don't actually just get to interact with the locals, but you also get to work, live, and just be around them the whole time you're on vacation. For changing your life's outlook, I personally think Gandhi says it best. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. And simply, that's what you're doing when you're going on a volunteer tourism trip. Making a difference. Now you're going to that community, you're either building a school or a building for them, you're helping their community. You're obviously making a difference. For volunteer experience, some people want to go put it on their resume, it looks good on their resume, just get the volunteer experience, or even just get the trip and new culture from it, and new country for the experience. And family background, well, family background actually has a huge impact on the motivation of volunteer tourism trips. A study done showed that young adults were more likely to volunteer if their parents had also volunteered and grown up participating in local volunteering opportunities around them. Now, they've done that local volunteering and they want to go abroad and see new cultures and also volunteer there as well. And this is just a picture of when I went on a volunteer tourism trip to Peru. And this is the meal hall that they eat at. And then we laid down the grass in front of it. A big factor for me was I actually got to see my work and the end result, which was really rewarding for me. Now, like any topic, there are also issues with volunteer tourism. There are many positives, which we've already covered, but volunteer tourism is actually a very controversial topic for some people. While tourists volunteer, they can build homes or schools or engage in work with the local community. They usually pay a significant fee for the opportunity to be involved in that work. Some locals or other people say that if that money was donated to a local community directly, it could possibly pay a greater amount of labor than the individual volunteer could have provided. Sometimes people think that the volunteers are taking away from the jobs of the locals, and they're not as trained in this skill, so they may take longer than a local who knows how it's done can do it. As for the volunteer, well, there's some issues with health and safety for them. While volunteering, the volunteers are interacting most of the time with the locals and usually staying and living like the locals. Therefore, it's said that they are more likely to get ill than if you were just to travel to a destination and stay in a resort. Since most volunteering happens in the developing areas of the country where the illness is the easiest to catch and you're not as protected as if you were in a resort, that's a huge issue for some people. Along with the area, it's not always the safest to travel to. And the last thing, the safety of the volunteers. Most of the volunteers are unskilled at the work they're doing. A lot of volunteers go to build a school in a community, but they never studied how to build a building. Therefore, they're untrained and they're actually putting themselves in danger of hurting themselves because they don't know how to do the task properly. Now, you're probably thinking, where's the most volunteer trips going, or where do most people travel to volunteer? Well, arguably, Africa is the leading continent destination that offers the highest amount of volunteer tourism trips. There are a few reasons why Africa is the leading continent of volunteer tourism. The major reason is that there is still a numerous of developing countries within Africa. Life across Africa is quickly evolving, without a question. Nations are changing and moving farther away from their foreign past, as well as the economy is still developing. Despite all these positive movements, there are still communities within Africa Africa that are in dire need of our support in order to just live a life. For this reason, volunteer tourism is such a massive part of why Africa is the leading location for volunteer tourism trips. Now, you're thinking, well, I want to do a volunteer tourism trip, but I don't necessarily want to go to Africa. It's not on the top of my list. Where else can I travel? The top 10 destinations outside of Africa to volunteer in 2018 are Australia, the United States of America, Italy, Haiti, Japan, Cuba, France, Iceland, Ireland, and New Zealand. So as you can see, there are many destinations on the top list that are within Africa. As well as all the other countries I didn't mention, there are more than likely opportunities for volunteer experience and trips that go there as well. Mainly, anywhere on your top destination chart, you can probably find a trip that goes there. And then you get the best of both worlds, as some people put it. You get to travel to your place as well as you get to volunteer there. Now, you might be thinking, well, how much does a volunteer tourism trip cost? And what are some companies or a company that offers these type of trips? So I'm here to tell you that Meetawi is an organization based out of Toronto that actually offers lots of trips, as we saw in previous slides, to many different populations. So let's just say, since Africa is the leading continent, let's just say we go to Kenya. And let's look, which is a 9-day trip. And it's for 8 to 80-year-olds, so all of us would fit in this demographic. On this trip, participants will immerse in the beauty and culture of Kenya. The project that participants will help out with is contributing to making this community a sustainable development. Now, last year on the trip to Kenya, in the picture on the left, you can see that we were building a building. This building was actually a school for the community. Not only do participants help build buildings for the communities, they also get to go on a journey with local women by foot to collect water from the river. Now, this is a trip that most women take at least once a day. We got to experience it and actually go on the walk with them. And let me tell you, it's not that easy of a trip. That water ton is heavy. But there's also some things that you get to do on these trips that aren't necessarily just volunteering. You learn Swahili and a sunrise safari, as well as many other things, are involved with this trip, 9 days to Kenya. And then here's just a picture that Meetawi has actually raised enough money to put a clean water well in this community, although the women still need to do the trek to the river to get the water on a daily basis. Now you're thinking, 9-day trip to Kenya, all this included? How much would this cost per person? Well, it is actually $4,395 US per person. But it includes quite a lot of things. What's included in the price is a Meetawi professional facilitator, 8 nights accommodations, all meals and drinks, including purified water, soda, beer, and wine, all activities that would be listed on the itinerary, ground transportation throughout the trip, as well as any flights that you need to take within Kenya during the trip would be included. The only extra cost that you would have associated with this trip would be the cost of your international flight to get from, say, Halifax to Kenya, and Meetawi would be more than willing to help you book that, as well as any souvenirs, of course, that you would want to buy in memory of this trip. Now, I know that was a lot of information, but is volunteer tourism for you? Well, you have a lot to think about, so if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below. And thank you so much for listening to my presentation.